Okay. So hello everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear my voice? Is that okay? May I start now? Okay, I think the time is up and I should start here. First of all, welcome to the Cyril lecture on fine Chinese traditional culture. And today I am going to be the speaker. And the topic of my talk today is Modern China in True Voice, Lu Xun and a Madman's Diary. So as you may see, today's talk is basically about perhaps one of the greatest modern Chinese writer Lu Xun and one of his masterpieces, Madman's Diary. So this talk consists of four parts. First, for those who are outside China, in order to get some basic concepts and keywords and names. In this talk, I might give some very brief explanation about issues that we might come across in this talk. Then we'll move on into, I call this part the problematic of language. That is to say, most of Chinese students might know this piece very well, A Madman's Diary, but today I'm going to analyze this piece from another aspect, was not that discussed about. That is to say, the perspective of language. So I had to concentrate. I have to explain why the problem of language matters and how it was involved into Lu Xun's thinking and how it was getting to the narrative of the specific story in Madman's Diary. And then I'll move into a close reading of this piece, A Madman's Diary. I try to give a new interpretation, not like the one you might read or find in classical literary history or what you learned in your middle school classroom as your teacher tried to teach you. And in conclusion, I try to tell you why the matters of language and how Lu Xun's thinking over language create a new imagination of China. So that's how a new China is possible in the so-called true voice. Okay, so let's first of all move to the first part, the introduction. Because this talk is prepared for overseas students. So in case you don't know him, first of all, I will say something about Lu Xun, this person. Although I believe for most Chinese speakers, there's no need to explain anymore because he's so famous. Everyone who ever attended elementary school might know him, might know his name. So Lu Xun, he is the pen name of Zhou Shuren. He was born in 1881 and died in 1936, died at the age of 55. He is the Chinese writer who is commonly considered as the greatest, the top one in 20th century Chinese literature. And he is always also important critic known for his sharp and unique essays on the historical and modern condition of China. Here I quote one sentence by Mao Zedong, who said this 1 year after Lu Xun's death, that is to say in 1937. He said that Confucius is the center of feudal society. Feudal society is traditional society, traditional China. Lu Xun is the center of modern China. So you can see why Lu Xun is so important, partly due to Mao's praise. And we can also understand that if Mao compared Lu Xun with Confucius, who was the saint all through 2,000 years in China, who was the top one in Confucian, and Lu Xun was believed to be the one who founded the new tradition, the tradition of modern China. And this is a very proof about Lu Xun. And Lu Xun had many contribution in writings. So first, he wrote many short stories, and you can see here the collection of his short stories, and the one we are talking about today is the first collection of his short story, Nahan. It can be translated into different titles, Call to Arms or Cheering from the Sideline, And also he have another collection was titled Pang Huang Wandering. And he renovated many historical stories into modern style, and he called that a collection of old stories retold. A very interesting and funny collection. I strongly recommend you if you don't read it. And also he created prose and prose poetry. This is a new genre he created in modern Chinese literature. So you can see Lu Xun is himself is really a stylist. He has a very sensitive idea about genre, about style, and he indeed created many different types of genre in modern Chinese literature, and also miscellaneous essays that contributes, I think, perhaps 80% of Lu Xun's writing. And also, this is a genre, 杂文, a new genre created and brought up by Lu Xun, was given birth by Lu Xun. So this is about Lu Xun. And then, as I said before, in this talk, we are going to talk about a Madman story from the perspective of language. So I have to explain a bit why language matters in China, especially in modern Chinese history. As we know that Chinese language is not a phonetic language. That is to say, we use Chinese characters. We use ideographs to write down. So we basically, what we are talking and what we are writing is not exactly the same. In that sense, we can differentiate two levels in Chinese languages. First is speaking, second is writing. We know that in traditional China, if you are educated, if you are a literati, you write in classical Chinese. That is to say, Wenyan. This is a very ancient writing system that you can trace back all to the days of Confucius. And you can see, because it lasted so many years, and the speaking, the oral form changes very fast. So you can see how distant it is to the speaking form. And when a Chinese is speaking, we know that there are still different types of different forms. For most of us, we speak dialects as our native language, but dialect is varied from region to region, right? Dialect in Guangdong, Cantonese, is very different from Putonghua or the northern dialect in the north part of China. So if a Cantonese, if he can only speak his own dialect of the Cantonese, if he travel to Beijing, he may not communicate with a Beijing fellow. And that created a huge problem, especially for a vast country, vast state like China. So in that case, you can see comes the need for an official language that everyone can communicate with the same tone, with the same voices. And the prototype of this so-called official language is Mandarin or Guanhua. That is not the language everyone speaks, but just some officials, some government officials, because they have to travel a lot. They are always appointed from one position to another. So they travel a lot, they move a lot, and they have to they have to create a speaking form so they can communicate with each other. And that is Guanhua Mandarin, the prototype of today's national language in Putonghua. And when the days goes into the Republican era, goes into the modern era of China, a need for a new government endorsed national language came about. So the intellectuals tried different ways, tried to invent a new national languages, and many experiments were carried on, and finally the intellectuals find it's most convenient to fix the national language as the northern dialect that is very common in most regions of China. And this is the predecessor of Putonghua, what we are talking today. So this is about speaking. And as I said, writing system is very different from the speaking system. We have classical Chinese, that is for the educated people. And when time goes to the 19th century, when Chinese intellectuals get in touch with European states, with North America, they suddenly realize languages are very different. They have phonetic languages, which you write exactly as what you said. So they blamed Chinese severe illiteracy toward classical Chinese because it is so difficult to learn, to master. You have to spend years in schools and try to practice and try to memorize everything. So they want to shift into a new writing system. And this time, for the very at the very beginning, they turn to vernacular, 白话. Vernacular is not something brand new. Vernacular already come up at Ming and Qing dynasty. It is the language or the writing system usually used by novels. The novels were a style that was considered as vulgar, as unsophisticated, as uncultivated for those educated people. So their turn to a writing system is designed for the commoners, for those one who are not that well educated but know some Chinese characters. And this is also the writing system that may force intellectuals, the intellectual generation of Lu Xun, try to adopt. And after Lu Xun, there are still some intellectuals will think vernacular is not enough because it still uses Chinese characters. So you can see here, vernacular and classical Chinese are still Chinese character scripts. So they try to Romanize Chinese language, and they created a new writing system. Zhao Yuanren, the famous linguistic Zhao Yuanren, who once taught in Tsinghua and later moved to the United States, created a system called 国语罗马字. And you can see here, oh, I'm sorry, 国语罗马字. This is something very similar to pinyin but differently. And he tried to use this romanization system of Chinese language, try to replace a Chinese character. And after 国语罗马字, the leftist proposed a new Latinized writing system. It is called Latinized New Writing. And this movement is very popular in 1930s. And it attracted Lu Xun's attention in 1930s as well. He is one of the supporters of this Latinized New Writing. And he believed that when we can use Latinized New Writing in place of classical Chinese or vernacular, that will be a big progress in Chinese civilization. And they try to, in that sense, they try to replace Chinese character script with a phonetic script. So you can see here in this modern Chinese language reform, one mainstream, one big trend is try to make the speaking and writing system as close as possible. So vernacular is one way to get that means, and phonetic script is the most radical experiment try to make that end happen. Okay, then when we are talking about language reform, there's also one thing we have to mention about, that is the new culture movement. Because language reform is associated with literary reform, which come about at the age of new culture movement, or roughly May 4th movements. And the center of this new culture movement is New You. This is a magazine very influential in the late 1910s and early 1920s. It was edited by Chen Duxiu, and also another great contributor to this magazine is Hu Shi. They advocated for literary reform in 1917, and that was also considered as the beginning of modern Chinese literature. So Hu Shi and Chen Duxiu published two very important pieces. Hu Shi is a preliminary discussion of literary reform on New You's 1917, and Chen Duxiu followed him up. He wrote on literary revolution. So basically, they are advocating for a new literary form. They try to replace the sophisticated, complicated classical Chinese with a plain, with an easy vernacular. And also, they think in order to get that language form, we first have to have a new literature. That's why this language reform is associated with literary reform or literary revolution. As one result, you may see that the Ministry of Education ordered all textbooks in elementary school to change their subject of national writing into national language in the year of 1920. So you can see the result is change the writing into a language. That is to say, to change the emphasis on writing system into the speaking system. Try to devise a writing system as similar as possible to oral speaking. So when we are talking about the story, Madman story, first of all, I should also explain that because we know Lu Xun is famous for his writing skills. He is very complicated in fact, although he uses vernacular try to express his idea as clear as enough, but he's still very complicated, and also his writing is full of richness. In that sense, when we are trying to approach Lu Xun in English translation, we find there's no perfect translation at all. So here I will use two different translations of this piece, A Madman's Diary. The first one is Diary of a Madman. It was translated by a Stanford professor, William Lyle. This translation was made in 1980s, and it was printed by Hawaii University Press in 1990. And the second one I'm using here, it is called A Madman's Diary. It was translated by Chinese famous translator Yang Xianyi and his British wife Gladys Young. It was printed by Foreign Language Press in 1956. So you can see that is during the age was believed to be very overwhelmed by political campaigns. So that ideological influence is saturated into that text. But I still think the second translation is very accurate, but the first one will absorb many new ideas from the Lu Xun research. And you may find Yang Xianyi as a Chinese, he understands some subtle details of Lu Xun try to convey, but William Law will focus more on especially the stylistic experiments of Lu Xun. So I will use both of these texts to get a better understanding of this story. Then let's move into the second part, the problematic of language. Okay, first of all, I want to say that as we know, the story 狂人日记 or A Madman's Diary, it was first printed on New Use in the year of 1918. So it is believed to be the first piece of modern Chinese literature, which boldly uses 白话 or vernacular as its writing language. Before 狂人日记, before A Madman's Diary, although Chen Duxiu and Hu Shi are advocating for literary reform, but ironically, they're writing their own pieces are all written in classical Chinese. So you can see this is the first one adopted vernacular as its writing language, and it's a literary piece. So you can see how far it goes, and it created a whole tradition of modern Chinese literature and also modern Chinese language. And also, we know that this is the first piece written under the pen name of Lu Xun. And as Lu Xun himself recalled, he regarded this as the one achievement of the literary reform that was initiated by Hu Shi and Chen Duxiu. But we know that Chen Duxiu and Hu Shi is advocating for something very plain, very clear. But is the language used in A Madman's Diary really as clear, as plain as Hu and Chen dreamed of? So this is one question I want you to think over it. And here I quoted a research by an American professor, Michael Gibb Hill. He compared, he found out in 1930s there is a Latinized transcript of A Madman's Diary, very interesting one. So he compared the Lu Xun's original text with its Latinized transcript. So you can see here, this is the cover page of the Latinized transcript. And it was all written in alphabets, so not in Chinese characters anymore. And when after the comparison, Michael Hill found out the vocabulary of the letter, that is to say, the Latinized version, is much closer to a colloquial register, eliminating any terminology that would not be immediately recognizable when the syllables represented by the romanized character are read aloud. That is to say, if you just read Lu Xun's original text to a uneducated commoner, he will find it extremely hard to understand. So the writer has to replace many terms, many usages into a accessible one. And I think one great example of this revision we can see from its title. We know that a Madman's Diary in Chinese is 狂人日记, right? Very famous title, but it was translated a bit. It was revised into 一个疯子的日记. So here, 狂人, it tells us, in fact, 狂人 is a term from classical Chinese. It's not vernacular at all. So if we try to make it as close possible as to the oral form, you still have to revise it. So this comes to the question, how are we supposed to understand Lu Xun's own attitude toward vernacular? In fact, if we look carefully enough, I will say his attitude is in fact very ambiguous. If we look Lu Xun's early life, like his early days in Tokyo in 1907 to 1909, where he started his early literary activities, in fact, he tried to renovate, use an archaic, abstruse, and unfriendly style of classical Chinese to compose essays and even translate European literature. He published a collection of his translation called Tales from Abroad. The language is so difficult, and I use some pieces of this collection in my classroom to students. And without annotation, without further explanation, they can't understand that at all. My students can't understand that at all. So you can see in early of Lu Xun's days, he tried to use this very difficult language. But why he turned to vernacular in 1918 when he decided to write a Madman's Diary? And also there is one episode in 1917 when Lu Xun's younger brother Zhou Zuoren came to Beijing. He recalled that, in fact, Lu Xun showed him some pieces of new use, which on which the discussion about literary reform, language reform is going on. And Lu Xun gave out a comment that among these methods, there are some nonsense worth refuting. In that sense, you can see at least at that moment in 1917, Lu Xun is not completely convinced of the idea of literary reform or language reform. However, after he became the writer of vernacular, the writer of modern Chinese literature, he soon turned into a radical support of language reform and vernacular from the 1920s. So later, we know he is the big supporter of vernacular and also Latinized revolution. But how are we going to explain his own transformation from classical Chinese to vernacular? Is it an abrupt one, or do we believe there is an internal logic inside that transformation? Here, I would like to introduce some comments by Japanese scholar Kiyama Hideo. He is the first one who pointed that underneath the similarly abrupt transformation from Lu Xun's early usage of classical Chinese to vernacular, he thinks there is in fact an enduring logic, but he didn't say it clear. What is that? But he believes there is a hidden logic. So the recent researcher Ji Jianjing, professor from Beijing University, he worked on this topic as well. And he made I think, very interesting explanation. So Ji believes Lu Xun's transformation from expressing an individual voice of heart to that is use the classical Chinese. and turn to vernacular means he gives up this individual voices part, but goes to summoning voices of heart of others. However, in their discussion, we can still find some unfinished problems. That is to say, when we are talking about language, individual, and the collective, how are we going to place national or collective imagination in Lu Xun's thinking in terms of sound and language? So basically, in Ji's idea, Lu Xun gives up the classical Chinese. Basically is a metaphorical gesture that he gives up his idea on individual, but embrace the collective, embrace the people. However, I think a intriguing fact is if we read Lu Xun's early writing properly, especially his preface to Tales from Abroad, he specifically said those lowling voices of heart that he described, he translated in Tales from Abroad. They are also drips of great wave in the era of nationalism. That is to say, you can see Lu Xun connect individual and those lowly voices of individual to nationalism quite clearly. And now I want to move to another theorist's idea, Karatani Koji. He, a Japanese theorist, he once proposed a theory that he believes sound or voice, individual, and modern nation state, the three elements in fact constitute a mutually supporting triadic structure. That is to say, he believes in the idea that the closer a language is to sound, the more likely it to reveal interior consciousness is in fact an ideological device that sustains modern nation states. That is to say, if we try to the search for a language that is more pure, more similar to our speaking, in fact, is a device to to sustaining nation-state building. However, what we find in Lu Xun's case is he tried to use very opaque voices in classical Chinese. And still, it is connected to a certain kind of nation-state imagination in his mind. So how are we going to understand these paradoxical situations? And also, Frederick Jameson, a very famous American scholar, also made a impressive reading of the Madman's Diary in the 80s. So his opinion basically is he thinks a Madman's Diary is something very amazing because it shows some very paradoxical qualities. We know the story in the first place. It is just a diary of a madman, right? That is to say, it's just a personal document of some psychological aberration. But as we read it, immediately we understand it is not just about someone who got mad, but it's about China's fate. So it's a grand national allegory. Frederick Jameson believes that the two qualities, first, a personal document, second, a national allegory, this is something just mutually exclusive if we read European literature or North American literature. But the seemingly paradoxical quality can be put together. So he believes this is a very common feature of literature from the third world. That is to say, a Madman's Diary or Lu Xun provided a model for third world literature. However, what I try to investigate here is what is the linguistic or textual mechanism that makes this paradox possible. Also here, I try to connect different elements. First of all, language. Language, especially its distance with oral speaking form, and also its relation toward nationalism and toward individual. So how those three elements work together and how it sustained a specific kind of imagination of collective, of nation, of nation building, especially in Lu Xun's mind? I think this is a very interesting a question. So now let's move into the third part, that is rereading the A Madman's Diary. When we are reading A Madman's Diary, I don't know if you ever noticed that. In fact, the story, of course, we know it consists of many pieces, many diary logs, diary entries of that madman. So he is basically narrating how he believes everyone around him trying to eat him. But in fact, in front of all these diary entries, there is a very interesting structural element. That is, there is a prologue. So this prologue, especially in Chinese, we will find it very specific. Why? Because it is written in classical Chinese. We know that all the diary entries by the madman are written in vernacular, but the prologue is written in classical Chinese. So you can see here comes a contrast. I think Lu Xun intentionally devised this contrast. And the prologue is from a different narrator. It's not from the madman himself, but from a friend. So he is basically speaking classical Chinese. He is talking about, I have two friends who were brothers, and we were friends when we went to the middle school, but I haven't heard of them for a long time. So there's one time I heard that one of the brothers got very sick, got very ill, mentally disordered. So I paid a visit to see if he's okay. And the elder brother met me and said, "Oh, my brother is recovered, and he was appointed to a government position. So he left. He's not at home anymore. But just don't worry about him anymore because it's okay. He is fit again." This is the story in the prologue. And what we can see from the diary entries, we know it is a complete mad story about a madman. And the end, we can see no signal the madman is recovering. So you see there is a huge contrast in content and contrast in linguistic forms. So this is the part now draws more and more attention for the researchers. And if we look at the translation parts, this is very interesting as well, because in Yang Xianyi and Gladys Young's translation, the early translation, we find they use still very plain and easy understanding English as the diary entries. It just said, two brothers, whose name I need not mention here, were both friends of mine in high school, but after a separation of many years, we gradually lost touch, blah, blah, blah. But in William Law's translation, he used this very convoluted and flowery English, trying to make the distinction between this style and the one he used in the diary entries. So let's see. Basically, it says, there was once a pair of male siblings whose actual name I beg your indulgence to withhold. Suffices to say that we three were boon companions during our school years. Subsequently, circumstances contrived to render us asunder, so that we were gradually bereft of knowledge regarding each other's activities. Not too long ago, however, I chanced to hear that one of them had been hard afflicted with a dread disease. So you can see William Lau tried to use very difficult English to convey the stylistic difference between the prologue and the diary entries. And as I said before, the prologue is a sharp contrast with diary entries following. The contrast lies in different levels. First, it is the linguistic style. The prologue uses classical Chinese, and the diary entries uses vernacular. And also, it created two narrators. So basically, the story of A Madman's Diary is not narrated just by one person. It is narrated by two narrators. There's one narrator in classical Chinese, Yu. Yu is the classical Chinese use of I. And we know that in diary entries, the The pronoun used is also 我, it is always 我, that is vernacular usage of I. So you can also see the contrast of narrators. And also, the prologue provided a different ending of the story. So the brother said by now, however, he had long since become sound and fit again. So the madman recovered. He is clear. He is not mad anymore, and he is able to receive a government appointment and to work on it. But at the end of the diary entries, we know the ending, very famous ending, that is save the children. So the madman sunk into complete desperation. He find no hope in life anymore. He think maybe only hope lies within the children who don't have a chance to eat people. So he want to save the children, or the world will be completely dark, will be hopeless. And you can see here also in that sense, the madman is not recovered at all. He got even madder than before. And so in that sense, the prologue and the diary entries shapes a very sharp contradiction. And in fact, it reveals one reversal, very interesting reversal structure. So we know that the madman is mad, right? But in the end, it is the madman who is talking about the truth about China in the end. The classical Chinese, the world of classical Chinese, the world of Yu seems to be reasonable, seems to be sound, seems to be clear-minded, but they are all they are all in this they are all sunk into this big deception. They have no idea what is really going on there. So in that sense, first of all, when if you were imagine you were a reader in 1918, you are accustomed to a writing system composed of classical Chinese. Well, you first get the chance to read the story of a madman's diary. Of course, we know that vernacular was considered, in that circumstances, was considered as something lunatic, as something out of mind, something only spoken by people who were out of their mind. And the classical Chinese is the language spoken by normal people, or pick up by the reasonable people. However, you will find the reversal structure, that it is not this normal language who is speaking about truth anymore, but the language of the madman, the vernacular, is telling the truth. So in that sense, we can find in a madman's diary, vernacular carries double tasks. It is the language form of a madman on one side, and at the same time, it is the means to reveal the historical truth about China. So this gives us a very interesting feeling of reading that. You can see we're in this reversal structure again and again. In the first moment, we realize it's just nonsense about madmen. In the second, we suddenly realize no, it's not. It's not nonsense by a mad person, but some historical truth. So how amazing and how fresh is that? However, still, what I want to ask, what I want to explore is, what is the linguistic mechanism in a madman's diary that, on one hand, it can distinguish reason and insanity, and on the other hand, it reverses their position. It makes insanity into something telling the truth, but reason something gets blocked from the truth. So in that sense, we have to probe into the logic, how the madman get mad. What is the meaning of the madman's madness? Let's move into the text. We know this is the very famous beginning of a madman's diary, right? The moonlight. The madman is talking about the moonlight. Moonlight is real nice tonight. Haven't said it over 30 years. Saying it today, I feel like a new man. I know now that I've been completely out of things for the last 3 decades or more, but I've still got to be very careful. Otherwise, how to explain those dirty looks the Zhao family stock gave me. This is on the first entry of the diary. And the moonlight, very important image. If you understand Western literature, European literature, you may know moonlight is something always associated with lunatic, right? The term, the root of the term lunatic, lunacy, actually carries the image lunar, that is to say moon. So moonlight is always associated with madness, with craziness. However, when we're thinking back into Chinese traditional literature, we know moonlight is something make you calm down, make you clear-minded, make you get rid of all these vanities and different things that bond your mind up, but make you go back to yourself, make you realize who you really are, make you homesick. So make you go back to your childhood, make you remember your friendship, and make you think about the really significant things in your life. So you can, here, basically Lu Xun combines the two sides of the image together. On one hand, it is, of course, the moonlight stir people, it let a person into lunacy, make the madman get mad. But at the same time, this moonlight make him clear-minded, make him notice what is really going on. It is in this very interesting way that we find the madman noticed something very strange that is happening around him. So when the first thing he think there's he think there's something strange as the dirty looks. Someone look at him in a strange way, or the dog look at him is looking at him in a strange way. And as he recalled, he remembered the woman on the street. He remembered when he walked on the street, there's a woman gave him strange looks. The woman slept her son, and he said, "Damn it all, you've got me so riled up. I could take a good bite right out of your hide." So the woman is talking about her son, but she was looking at Madman, and this is the moment for the first time, dirty looks and the image of bite merged together. They overlapped together. So Madman, it is for the first time he got afraid. He felt strange in the very beginning, but he don't know why. It is this moment he said, "I tried, but I couldn't conceal a shudder of fright." He is afraid. He thinks something is there, and he's in danger. Something is there and try to take his life or try to endanger his life. And he went back. He can't sleep well. So he read books, especially read history. No, I'm sorry, no, not to that part yet. He recalled a moment when some tenant farmers came to his house. They're from the village called Wolf Cup Village, and they're here to report a famine. So basically, they were talking to Madman's elder brother about a bad guy who was killed by the villagers, and they eat their heart and life and fry that. So he tried to get into the conversation. This incident itself, at that moment, didn't scare the madman. But when he tried to get into the conversation, suddenly he found the sinister looks again by the farmers and by his elder brothers. So it is here he realized for the first time that the expression in their eyes was just the same as what I saw in those people on the streets. So he tried to get to understand what these looks really mean. He can't sleep, so he goes to books, and he read history books for the whole night. He found there were no dates in this history, but scrawled this way and that across every page were the words benevolence, righteousness, and morality. Since I couldn't go to sleep anyway, I read that history very carefully for most of the night and finally began to make out what was written between the lines. This is the most appalling and also most striking moment in a Madman's diary, that he found the real message. What is written between the lines? The whole volume was filled with a single phrase: eat people. And the words written in the history book, the things the tenant farmer said, all of it began to stare at me with hideous eyes, began to snore and growl at me from behind bared teeth. You see, this is the final moment. Make him believe cannibalism. Make him believe the behavior of eating people exists around him. And as I said, you may find how the madman get mad or how he believed. The process of his making believe is, in fact, you can see how he step by step deviated from the language side of itself. And so first of all, he came up with a woman who is basically talking about her son. The woman, she said, "You've got me so riled up, I could take a good bite right out of your hide." So this is talking about her son, but the looks at Madman makes Madman believe that the object of the behavior eating is not toward the woman's son, but toward the madman himself. So basically, he singled out all these different linguistic signs of eating, which is not targeting at madman himself, but he connected them together, accumulate all these different signs as his own evidences of cannibalism. And also in the diary entry 6, there is an episode when elder brother tried to ask the doctor to see Madman. And before the doctor left, the doctor said to the elder brother to be eaten as soon as possible. If you're a normal person, we know, we try to imagine from a normal person's perspective. We understand the doctor is talking about medicine, right? The doctor is asked the elder brother to have the madman eat medicine as soon as possible. But madman believes the object to be eaten is not the medicine, but madman himself. And also, the madman recalled moments when the elder brother taught him about classics, when he taught him about the expressions to express the hatefulness or resentfulness of a person, uses the specific expression, "Flesh should be eaten and his skin used a sleeping mat." The madman didn't take it as a metaphor, didn't take it as a linguistic sign, but think this is actual behavior. This is action that already exists. So this is, you can see, this is how the madman get mad, and we can say, in fact, this is a linguistic disorder. And we can compare this linguistic disorder madness with another text that is by Nicolas Gogol, Diary of a Madman, the same title story, which inspired Lu Xun to write his own Diary of a Madman. So Gogol's story is about a low-ranking civil servant in Tsar Russia whose name is Poprishkin. He desperately fell in love to his director's beautiful daughter, Sophie, but his love is so hopeless, so he gradually slides into infinity. And Poprishkin's madness is very different from Madman. Poprishkin, in the end, he believed he is the king of Spain. So you can see that's the moment he really get mad, really get out of his mind. And he can't recognize everyone around him. When someone from the asylum came to get him and sent him to asylum, he thought it is his he thought it's his governors from Spain to get him back, to get him to put him on the throne. And when he was when he was kept in the asylum, he thought the doctors, the nurses who attend him, who try to take care of him, are the inquisitors who are going to kill him. So you can see basically he can't recognize people around him anymore, and he don't know who he is anymore. But this is quite different from Lu Xun's madman's story. Lu Xun's madman know exactly who is his elder brother, who is his mother, who is the neighbors, who are the neighbors and who are the relatives. He knows them quite well. What he didn't know is the object of the language, of the linguistic science. In that way, we can say that also how to understand the madman's madness. We can find something very interesting. So Madman is in fact he is very insisted on a direct correspondence between the sign and the object of the sign. So in a linguistic term, this is called signified and the signifier. This is the terminology created by famous linguistic Ferdinand Saussure. Here I borrowed from him. There is a one paragraph that the madman tried to persuade his elder brother to give up eating people. This is what he said. They want to eat me, and of course you can do nothing about it single-handed. But why must you join them? As man-eater, they are capable of anything. If you eat me, they can eat you as well. Members of the same group can still eat each other. But if you will just change your ways, change right way, then everyone will have peace. Although this has been going on since time immemorial, today we could make a special effort to do what is right and say this can be done. I'm sure you can say that, brother. The other day when the tenant wanted the rent reduced, you said it couldn't be done. Here you see this can be done or it couldn't be done appear twice. That is exactly what was written by Lu Xun. From the first side, this is incomprehensible, right? Why the elder brother can refuse the tenant to reduce the rent can make the madman believe that his elder brother will give up eating people. So you can see what obsessed madman's mind is that if elder brother can say this can't be done to one thing, he can say this can be done to another one. It doesn't matter what is the object behind this can be done. He's only obsessed with the signifier, with the sign this can be done. So if the elder brother can say it can be done to the tenant, of course he can say it can be done to the man-eaters, to the cannibals. This is something if we don't understand from the normal mind, but we can see this is exactly how the madman get his madness. And this is also the part William Lyle, as a foreign translator, don't understand it well. You can see he tried to make it in his translation into a reasonable version. He said, even though people may say it's always been like this, we can still do our best to improve, and we can start today. You are going to tell me it can't be done. Elder brother, I think you are very likely to say that. When that tenant wanted to reduce his rent the day before yesterday, wasn't it you who said it couldn't be done? So William Lyle apparently think, you can see first of all in the original text, this is a whole paragraph. William Lyle split it into two paragraphs and tried to make it into a reasonable way. So in the middle, suddenly, it feels like the madman was disappointed at his elder brother. He knows he cannot give up eating people anymore because he refuses the tenant's request. And that's why it can be done, can appear twice. And you can, this is exactly the trick was placed or devised by Lu Xun. The madman is still very mad at that moment, and when he said it can be done, he's basically obsessed with the signifiers. And it is this insistency on the direct correspondence between the language signs that make him mad, but at the same time make him find out the truth. So it is from here we'll see Madman got very suspicious about the existing language system. In his memories, he said he remembered the moment the elder brother was teaching him composition. He remembered no matter how good a man was, if I could find a few things wrong with him, he would approvingly underline my words. On the other hand, if I made a few allowance for Batman, he'd say I was an extraordinary student, an absolute genius. When all is said and done, how can I possibly guess what people like that have in mind, especially when they're getting ready for Cannibal's Feast? So, in that sense, what what makes the Madman get lost is the play of languages, because the language has nothing to do with the ethical or moral judgment anymore. It's just the play. It's just how you can geniusly manipulate it. When everyone said this is a bad guy, but you can say something good about him, and everyone think this is a nice person, you can find something weak on him. And this make the Madman completely get lost. And he developed a suspicion toward the existing language system. It is here that we can finally revisit the appalling, the striking moment of this famous piece, when he finds between lines the real message behind the benevolence, righteousness, and morality is in fact eat people. We can say that here is also a moment the Madman demolished the old language system. The correspondence between benevolence, righteousness, and morality is supposed to be nice, right? But love is supposed to be love, friendship, and nice feeling among people. But in fact, no, it directs to what? It directs to eat people. The most appalling cruelty that ever happened in human history. So he not only demolished the old language system, but also restructuring a true corresponding relation of the signifier and the signified thereafter. This turns to be a hidden logic that drives the narrative of a Madman story. However, here also is another question. Does that mean that vernacular is used in a Madman story is pure the language of honesty and truth? While classical Chinese is pretentiousness and hypocrisy, as Hu Shi and Chen Duxiu argued. So when we look into a Madman story, we might find, as Wen Guiliang argued, there are different types of language form in a Madman story. First is the Madman's vernacular. That is the vernacular spoken or expressed by the Madman. He used this vernacular to express himself. And we have to realize, we have to notice that everyone around him in the diary entries, basically they are speaking Mandarin. They are speaking vernacular as well. They are not talking in classical Chinese. The classical Chinese are only written on books. That is the language he finds in history books. Behind that, behind benevolence, righteousness, and morality is eat people, a single phrase. But everyone around him speak vernacular. So we can see very interestingly in the 13 diary entries, although the hypocritical world, in contrast with the Madman, states to be a co-drive of the narrative, the conflict between the Madman and the surrounding people is still primarily presented as impossibility of communication. However, both sides still in the story, they speak vernacular. That is to say, the contradiction between the honest, true Madman and the hypocritical surrounding world has nothing to do with language choice. So in that sense, we can see Lu Xun set up very complicated language levels in a Madman story. Among them, not only classical Chinese vernacular are in opposition, but the Madman's vernacular is also in opposition to everyday vernacular spoken by people around him. This setting, in fact, indicates that Lu Xun does not approve and expect vernacular single-minded as Hu Shi and Chen Duxiu does. In contrast, he believes that vernacular may also be applied for hypocrisy and deception, just as classical Chinese is. In order to reconstruct a true language, vernacular as a linguistic device that is capable of destroying fake representation and re-establish the true correspondence of linguistic science must be underlined at the same time by a strong will of the speaker himself. That is to say, only the will to be honest, to be true of the madman makes this language, makes vernacular the language of truth, make it the language of honesty. If without this will, it can also be applied, be an instrument of deception, of hypocrisy as well. So let's move into our last part or the conclusion part, how this new China imagination was possible in this true voice. First of all, we have to compare Lu Xun's idea over language and Hu Shi's imagination. So basically, they propose different language nation agendas. For Hu Shi, you can see he made a distinction between living vernacular and that classical Chinese. So from that classical Chinese into living vernacular means a evolution, a social evolution, and also means a self-transformation for China from a old empire, nearly that empire, into a new, a booming, a young nation state. So vernacular in that sense was imagined as a national language. It is supposed to express a common voice of all the members of a modern national community. However, what we find in Lu Xun is a powerful personal voice, that it keeps loyal only to his own belief. This voice succeeds in not only dismantling the old myths of classical Chinese, but also tearing apart the camouflage of everyday vernacular. So what we can find for Lu Xun in his thinking over language, especially Madman's Diary, we have to trace back to his early days. He invented this idea, voice of heart, back in his days in Tokyo. He described it as a sincere and distinct personal voice, which in contrast was the corrupted bad voice of the group. So first of all, we can see he thinks the voice of heart is something in contrast with the group. The personal voice is always sincere and distinct, and the group voice is bad, is corrupted. In the Madman's Diary, we find the similar tension between a genuine individual voice and a hypocritical collective language system. And in that sense, we can see if we find a connection from Lu Xun's early days to a Madman's Diary, we find the adoption, the choice of language as classical Chinese or vernacular is in fact not that significant, not that important, but it is the will. It is about the will to have a true voice, about a loyal to himself is the most significant part. But if we limit it within the present, if Lu Xun placed the individual and the crowd in a contradictory relation, at the same time, he hoped that a sincere individual voice can destroy old and hypocritical norms of the world. So how this nation, how a new collective is possible? Lu Xun basically believes that a brand new national community may be born in the future, only through the way by place individual and the collective in the contradictory relationship. So in this sense, we can say the drastic turn in Lu Xun's thinking over voice and language often confuses researchers. We find this is a very enigmatic part of Lu Xun's thinking and Lu Xun's writing. However, under the seemingly abrupt transition lies a hidden logic. It is the pursuit of a heartfelt, sincere voice that places self-intention with the community, which breaks the hypocritical and repressive established order and summons the arrival of a new community. Throughout his life, Lu Xun never had a concrete vision of the community to be summoned, but his search for this sincere and rebellious voice were persistent. This voice not only made Lu Xun write down a series of stories including A Madman's Diary, but also made Lu Xun acquire a specific position. Here, the lonely interior voice no longer led to an autonomic individual under oppressive modern nation state, but turned to be a constant challenge toward the latter. The Madman's monologue was no longer a private story of neurosis differentia, but constitutes a national allegory. Okay, that's the end of my talk today. Thank you very much.